off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have Hogen Fukunaga. Hogen is the founder of a cult that is often called the foot reading cult. Hogen made claims that he would be able to diagnose people by examining their feet. Other than his potentially false diagnosis, this wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, except for the fact that he charged people $900 for a foot reading. Hogen also claimed to be the world's final savior, third in line after Jesus Christ and Buddha. This cult started in 1980 while Hogen was 34 years old and apparently was more than 500 million yen in debt. Hogen would read people's feet and then tell them their problems, but would say these issues could only be fixed if they attended a cult seminar, which would cost them 2.25 million yen, or if they donated 14.3 million yen to the cult. I feel like this red flag should have been more than enough to warn people, but at one point the group claimed to have 30,000 members. Hogen was eventually arrested and sentenced to 12 years in prison for fraud, and the cult went bankrupt. In our number 8 spot today, we have Chris Korda. Chris Korda is a musician and software developer who is also the leader of the Church of Euthanasia. This is a cult that says they aim to restore the balance between humans and the other species on Earth. Chris describes the cult as the only anti-human religion, considering the whole cult is based on the idea of drastically reducing the human population voluntarily. There are some interesting and extremely problematic slogans and pillars that go along with the cult, and one commandment that reads, "Thou shalt not procreate." This cult has done some extremely offensive and distasteful things and actually puts out videos and promotions on how to take your own life, which is terrible. Chris is still very active as the cult's leader and also continues to put out music. In our number 7 spot today, we have Rael. Rael is a French journalist who is also the founder of what is called the Raelian movement, which is a UFO cult. Apparently, Rael had some sort of extraterrestrial encounter in December of 1973, and this is what led him to found this movement. Rael says that during his alien encounter, the alien told him that he was the chosen one and he needed to spread the message to the people on Earth. This UFO cult believes that humans were created by an alien species, and once we find a way to find peace on Earth, those aliens will come down and tell us our true origins and bring us utopia. It seems as though Rael now lives in Canada and he still continues to spread his message. In our number 6 spot today, we have Larry Ray. Larry Ray is a man who, after being released from prison, moved into his daughter's college dorm room in 2010. Larry and his daughter painted him to be some kind of hero and protector and convinced the other people in the dorm that the government was just out to get him, and that's how he was allowed to move into the dorm. After moving in, he slowly began to manipulate and prey on the people who lived there, isolating them from their friends and family, and began giving them serious and incorrect diagnoses such as schizophrenia. He began to control everything they all did, such as when they ate, what they ate, when they went to sleep, etc., and he would extort them for money, which ended up totaling to more than $1 million. Ray ended up forcing all of these people into his cult, basically without them even realizing what was going on. He was psychologically and physically abusing them, and even went as far as to force some of them into doing things they didn't want to do. Ray ended up being arrested in February of last year and is awaiting trial. He still continues to try and contact his followers, even getting his elderly father to contact some of them for him. In our number 5 spot today, we have Harold Klemp. Harold is actually probably the most normal and least scary person on this list, which truly is a relief. Harold is the leader of the cult of Ekankar, which was originally founded by Paul Twitchell. After Paul passed away, Harold became the new group leader. This group focuses on a lot of spiritual practices and exercises and doesn't have a ton of weird rules when you join. No dietary requirements, no taboo things you're forced into, and you don't even have to leave your current religion or faith to join the group. There have, of course, been extremely problematic members who have done some very questionable things, but not at the command of the group or Harold, to my knowledge. Harold continues to lead the group, and they even have a website, a Twitter page, and a YouTube account. In our number 3 spot today, we have Buffalo Bill Hawkins. Buffalo Bill, who is also known as Yisrael, is the founder of the House of Yahweh. Bill and his brothers say that they were sent by Yahweh to prepare the world for the second coming of the Messiah. They believe that the House of Yahweh is the oldest and only true faith, and that the world is about to experience the Great Tribulation, which is a sign of the end times. They also believe that the Bible refers to Satan as the god of this world. This cult isn't unlike a lot of other religions, and they have their own beliefs and ideologies. Bill has attempted and of course failed to predict the end times throughout the years, the most recent prediction being in 2016. In 2008, Bill was arrested on 4 counts of bigamy, and his bail was originally set at $10 million before it was reduced to $100,000. He ended up being released in 2009 after he pleaded no contest to some other charges that had been laid against him, and he was only given a fine and probation. In our number 1 spot today, we have Karen Zerbe. Of course her name is Karen. Don't put that in. Karen is the leader of the cult now known as the Family of Love, but is much better known by its former name, the Children of God. In 1969, Karen joined a group called Teens for Christ and ended up becoming the personal secretary to David Berg, who was the one who founded the group. Eventually, David would divorce his wife in order to marry Karen. Karen had a son named Ricky, and his childhood was made into a book, which was used to show other members of the cult how they should raise their children, but the book included some pretty horrific and disturbing content. At first, Karen wasn't around or extremely active in the cult, but she began to insert herself more and more and began making rules and enforcing discipline. Once David began to get sick in 1988, Karen took over the leadership position that she had been groomed for. After David passed away, she married another leader from the cult. This cult has actually seen a few celebrities over the years. Jeremy Spencer, who was one of the founding members of Fleetwood Mac, is a member of this cult. Joaquin Phoenix and his siblings were unfortunately subject to this terrible cult when they were growing up, but they all chose to leave later in life and as adults have spoken out about this cult. Unfortunately, Karen is still active as the cult's leader, even though she most definitely should be in prison. Starting off this list, we have the Movement for the Restoration of the 10 Commandments of God. This cult with the catchiest name was founded in Uganda by 4 ex-Roman Catholic priests, 2 ex-nuns, and 1 former sex worker, and it was initially said to really emphasize the 10 Commandments. Apparently, these leaders thought that the Roman Catholic Church had really abandoned the 10 Commandments, and they wanted to bring back some rules. They couldn't just focus on these rules, however, they also had some doomsday prophecies as well, like all good cults. They claimed that the apocalypse would come on December 31st, 1999, and in anticipation of this, a bunch of the members sold all of their possessions, so of course they were pretty irritated when the world in fact did not end. The leaders scrambled and instead altered their prediction, saying that the Virgin Mary would instead come on March 17th, 2000, and that she would bring them all to heaven. The followers continued to believe this, and on March 16th they had a huge feast. The following day, on March 17th, police arrived to where the cult resided and found that an explosion and fire had killed hundreds of members of the group. At first they thought that this could have been a voluntary event, but soon they saw the signs that pointed to this being a mass killing. The leaders likely took the lives of the followers because they could not pay them back, and they also knew that their quote-unquote prophecies were false. At first it was thought that the leaders were among those whose bodies were found, but that isn't quite the case. No one is exactly sure if they ended up losing their lives or if instead they fled the country, which many people believe. At this point, there is still a warrant out for their arrest, so while the authorities have never officially confirmed that they are on the run, it is truly the most likely scenario. In our number 9 spot today, we have Karen Zerbe. Karen is the leader of the cult now known as the Family of Love, which is much better known by its former name, the Children of God. In 1969, Karen joined a group called Teens for Christ and ended up becoming the personal secretary to David Berg, who was the one who founded the group. Eventually, David would divorce his wife in order to marry Karen. Karen had a son named Ricky, and his childhood was made into a book which was used to show other members of the cult how they should raise their children, but the book included some pretty horrific and disturbing content. At first, Karen wasn't around or extremely active in the cult, but she began to insert herself more and more and began making rules and enforcing discipline. Once David began to get sick in 1988, Karen took over the leadership position that she had been groomed for. After David passed away, she married another leader from the cult, and all the while Karen was extremely elusive. So much so that some of her followers didn't even know what she looked like. This cult has actually seen a few celebrities over the years. Jeremy Spencer, who is one of the founding members of Fleetwood Mac, is a member of this cult. Joaquin Phoenix and his siblings were unfortunately subject to this terrible cult when they were growing up, but they all chose to leave later in life and as adults have spoken out about the cult. Unfortunately, Karen is still active as the cult's leader, even though she most definitely should be in prison, and she still remains in hiding, living off of what money she could collect from her followers. In our number 7 spot today, we have Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo. Adolfo was at one point a dealer and also the leader of a horrifying cult that was nicknamed by the media the Narco-Satanists. Adolfo's followers believed that he had magical abilities, but in the worst way possible. He required his followers to kidnap young men who Adolfo would practice horrible, sadistic rituals on and ultimately take their lives in order to replenish his magic. It's an absolutely horrific story, and this carried on for years until the disappearance of Mark Kilroy. Mark was a Texas college student who was in Mexico for some fun over spring break in 1989, but sadly during this trip he was taken by the cult's followers. Mark's friends quickly noticed his disappearance and began searching for him. This led to a border-crossing manhunt, and authorities quickly revealed what had been going on, but Adolfo had already fled. He and 4 of his followers fled to Mexico City, and this is how he was finally caught. Police were called to the apartment they were staying at as a result of a totally unrelated dispute, but because Adolfo knew they were looking for him, he just assumed that they were there for him and he opened fire with a machine gun. Not wanting to go to prison, he then handed the weapon over to one of his followers and asked him to open fire on himself, and by the time police were able to reach the apartment, he was already dead. In the end, 14 cult members were charged for the crimes relating to everything that went on. In our number 6 spot today, we have Shoko Asahara, leader of the Aum Shinrikyo cult and claiming to be the reincarnation of the Hindu god Shiva. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. He said he was destined to lead his followers to salvation once the apocalypse came, but then once he lured in followers, he claimed he could also teach them to levitate and develop telepathic abilities. Apparently those who were most skeptical, he allowed them to drink his bathwater. I have no idea why or what this was supposed to be for, and I wish I could unlearn it, to be honest, but now we all have to suffer with that information together. The cult continued to grow and it drew in influential and wealthy people. And what did Shoko do? He devised a plan and had a group go on to attack Tokyo in 1994, which took the lives of 7 people. Then in 1995 they released gas into the Tokyo underground, which led to 12 deaths, 50 injured people, and more than 5,000 people with temporary vision problems. Of course, this sent him into hiding as he didn't want to face the consequences of his actions. After several months, however, he was found hiding out in the group's compound near Mount Fuji. In the end, Asahara and 11 of his disciples ended up being arrested and charged, and they were all sentenced to death in 2004. In our number 5 spot today, we have David Koresh. You may also know him as Vernon Howell, but whatever you call him, he sucks. In the 1930s, Lois and Ben Rodin, who were the founders of the Branch Davidian sect, believed that a new messiah would arrive. Shortly after this is when David joined the group and he began to get close to the pair. After Lois passed away, he managed to gain control of the following, and he changed his name to become the new leader and self-proclaimed messiah. Under the control of David, allegations of horrible crimes began to come out from the cult, and on February 28, 1993, there was a warrant issued for his arrest, but David wasn't about to give up that easily. David hid himself inside of a compound, and when the authorities came knocking, things escalated and there was a shootout in which 6 members of the group lost their lives, but so did 4 members of the ATF. Over 51 days there were negotiations being made with David while he continued to stall. It is said that this all finally came to an end when the FBI carried out a last mission to take members of the sect by force. This is when the compound they were in was set on fire and 76 members of the Davidians, including David himself, perished. In our number 4 spot today, we have Jim Jones. Jim is certainly one of the most well-known people on this list for all of the wrong reasons. He is the man who claimed that he was the reincarnation of Jesus, Buddha, and Gandhi, and he founded the cult which was originally called Wings of Deliverance, but he later changed the name to the People's Temple Full Gospel Church. After an expose in the New West magazine about the things going on in this cult, Jim felt the need to move move him and his followers into hiding. In order to flee the media scrutiny in the United States, Jim leased land in Guyana and ended up moving them all there. From here, there were claims of horrible things and human rights violations, which led to another investigation. People found out that some of the supposed members of this cult were actually being held against their will. In the end, with all of this going on, Jim managed to convince his followers to all take their lives in one massive, horrible event, and this day has gone on to become known as the Jonestown Massacre. A total of 918 people died that day, including Jim himself. In our number 3 spot today, we have the True Russian Orthodox Church. Also known as Heavenly Jerusalem, this cult was an offshoot of the Russian Orthodox Church founded by Peter Kuznetsov. Back in 2007, there were about 30 members of this group that all went into hiding in a Russian cave, where Peter told them that they had to wait until the world ended in 2008. This one is a little different from the others on this list because while Peter put these members into the cave, he didn't go in there with them. After 2 members died in the cave, one passed from cancer and the other from starvation, some of the members ended up deciding to leave. Like, thank goodness. They ended up leaving because they were frightened of the toxic fumes that could come from the corpses. The other members in the cave only left after the roof of the cave started to collapse in 2008. In May of that year, after the bodies of those who had passed were removed by authorities, the cave was then blown up. In our number 2 spot today, we have Daniel Perez. Daniel Perez might be better known by his alias Lou Castro, but whatever you want to call him, he led a cult that was located on a 20-acre property in a rural area just north of Wichita. He convinced his followers that he had magical powers, and he told them all that he was a centuries-old angel who needed to commit some horrific crimes in order to stay alive. These crimes would have certainly been more than enough to just throw him on this list, but he of course couldn't just stop at committing one type of crime. He had to make sure he really stole the show on being the worst. Basically, he had this clever idea to use his followers' life insurance policies in order to live a lavish lifestyle. Like, as if no one would think that's weird or suspicious. While some of these life insurance policies were collected through regular means, of course that kind of greed only leads to evil things, which of course means that he ended up taking one of his followers' lives so that he could collect the cash. It is thought that he also contributed to the deaths of some of the other people's life insurance policies he cashed in on, but unfortunately there was never any evidence that would be able to substantiate that claim. In 2010, Castro moved from Kansas to Tennessee and adopted a new identity, but he was soon arrested by the FBI for aggravated identity theft and fraudulent use of a social security card number. While serving time for this crime, it was discovered what his real name was, as well as the charges that had been placed against that former identity. Thankfully, in February of 2015, he was convicted on all counts and received a sentence of 80 years in jail. In our number 1 spot today, we have Benito Massaro. At 25 years old, Benito decided to move his life to America, where he began to post his teachings online, but recently, former members of his cult have begun speaking out about the harm that they faced as a part of it. It is said that many of his beliefs follow the sort of ideas of igniting a quote global awakening, and that he plans to quote establish an enlightened civilization ready for interstellar absorption by 2035. But aside from these lofty goals and ideologies, the leader has come under his fair share of scrutiny, and for good reason. His first time in the hot seat was back in 2017 after somebody took their own life at one of his 12-day Sedona retreats. This story quickly picked up the attention of the media, where critics began referring to him as quote Steve Jobs meets Jim Jones. Apparently, as a result of this criticism, he ended up moving from the United States back to Holland. This is where he continued to hold retreats, but because of the intense scrutiny, he has vanished quite a bit from holding these in-person events, instead moving a lot of his content over to, you guessed it, right here on YouTube. And he is not shy in showing off the money he has been given by his followers. One of Benito's former followers, Jade Electra, has taken to her Instagram to warn others of the danger of his cult and teachings. She wrote, quote, "He is a walking dementor, and I am standing up and sharing the truth because too many are abused and stuck behind the fear, the bullying that occurs in the cults, and their literal gag orders students are given before they even know what will happen to them. Another former member who also spoke out, Keelan McNeil, wrote, quote, "Over the course of the years it became increasingly and eventually blaringly obvious that Benito Massaro's intention is to not actually help the planet or others, but it is to use his, quote, mission or organization to get what he wants, which is only women, money, and power." She continued on, quote, "I want you all to know that the psychological and spiritual warfare that takes place behind closed doors and within Benito Massaro's community is extremely dark and dangerous. People are giving up their free will under the guise of transcending their egos, and Benito Massaro is exploiting them in every way that he can as a result."
Coming in at number 10, we have Eastern Lightning. In May 2014, members of Eastern Lightning, a cult found across China, killed a woman in a McDonald's restaurant in the Shandong province of China. It seems that 6 cult members infiltrated the chain and went around diners asking for their cell phone numbers. Perhaps they were searching for new recruits. One woman refused, and she was then set upon by cult members Zhang Lidong, who claimed that she was an evil demon. He then grabbed a steel mop and beat the woman, a 37-year-old mother, with it and stamped on her head for a full 3 minutes until she died. The other cult members stopped the public from intervening, although many were too scared to move. The police arrived and Lidong was arrested and sentenced to death, but he still maintains that the woman was evil. Another cult member stabbed an elderly woman and 23 students at a school in the Henan province. Eastern Lightning believes that Christ has been reincarnated as a woman from central China and wants to fight the so-called Red Dragon of communism. The cult has long been associated with blackmailing and oppression at best, and kidnap and murder at worst. Not feeling great about cults, and it's only number 10. Coming in at number 9, we have Raelism. One click on the Raelism website will tell you that the group believes that life on Earth was created by extraterrestrials who were mistaken for gods by our primitive ancestors. Sure. Cult founder Claude Verihon has changed his name to Rael. He claims that he had a vision of an alien spacecraft descending over southern France. In his vision, he lived among the aliens for 6 days and was told that Jesus was an alien and that humans were the only hope for the future of the universe. Their judgment day will be given by an alien called Elohim. They believe in topless rights for women, which, you know, I'm pretty pro freeing the nip. But what makes Raelists a bit worrying is that they believe that they are way more intelligent than other people, and they're very pro-human cloning. Now, I am pro-science, but their methods do seem a bit dubious. They claim that they cloned a baby and they named her Eve. They're also keen to implant memories and personalities from one person into a clone. It's kind of like the premise of Get Out, which was a very worrying movie indeed. Now, the Vatican have specifically spoken out against this cult, and they really don't like their ideas for cloning practices. Coming into number 8, we have the Congregation for the Light. This cult has something with owls going on, which, I mean, we can all appreciate a good owl, but I do draw the line at a cult owl. No cult owls here. The Congregation for the Light is a so-called cult ruled by the formidable Tom Bayer. They are headquartered in Manhattan and believe humanity comes from an Aryan race in the lost city of Atlantis. From former members and those who have had dalliances with the light, it seems that the group has a very oppressive grip over relationships and loved ones of members. Cult members are trained with M14 automatic rifles in preparation for the end of the world. Good, or crazy people with guns. They also want to erase homosexuality, and according to the testament of a former member, they act like robots and beat people into subservience. Great. An absolute classic at number 2. Is it confirmed? It's the Illuminati. It's the age-old question, isn't it? Is the Illuminati real? Well, honestly, probably. The name is applied to a lot of secretive groups, but it actually was a secret society in the 1700s. The group was thought to have 2,500 members at its peak and was filled with societal climbers who wanted to place Illuminati members in positions of power. A lot of people think that the secret society still exists today, and they claim that celebrities like Beyonce and Justin Bieber are members. Others say that the cryptic pyramid on the United States dollar is a reference to Illuminati members infiltrating the federal bank. People say that there is a new world order, and if you know anything about it, you already know too much.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Angel's Landing. In the early 2000s, a man named Daniel Perez, or Lou Castro, led a cult that lived at Angel's Landing.
They all lived on a 20-acre property outside of Wichita, Kansas. Now, Perez had control of these followers because he convinced them that he was an angel and a seer that could look into the future and know exactly when they were going to die. Obviously, that was false. In reality, he would kill off his followers and use their life insurance policies to become rich. He was getting away with it for a while until police looked into the death of one of his followers, Patricia Hughes. In 2003, her dead body was found on the compound. Then in 2006, her husband mysteriously passed away. This all led the police back to Perez, who had changed his identity to Lou Castro. Eventually, he was caught and sentenced to 80 years in prison for the lengthy list of his disturbing crimes he committed. Yikes. In our ninth spot today, we have the Children of God. Formed in 1968, the Children of God, now referred to as the Family International, is a cult that believes in salvation and spiritual revolution and happiness. But as the group got a big following, their beliefs shifted. From there, the followers were forced to engage in dark practices, like having the females lure men into the cult by having intercourse with them. Sadly, the followers were often mistreated in multiple ways. One woman who was a part of this cult as a child referred to it as living hell. It literally traumatized her. 31 people died at the hands of this cult. And like I said, it's still active, but in 2004 just changed its name to Family International. Moving on to number 8, we have the Brethren. This one is quite interesting. So the Brethren have also been given the name the Body of Christ, or Brothers and Sisters, and even Garbage Eaters. Why? Well, you're about to find out, that's for sure. So for starters, this cult believes that the end of the world is near, and so they are told they have to purify themselves in preparation for the end of the world. They do this by selling their possessions and breaking ties with all their family and friends. They then live as vagrants, eating garbage, hardly ever bathing, and never receive any medical treatment. They also do weird jobs to make money, but then any money they earn just goes right into the group. Due to this lifestyle, a number of group members have had serious mental breakdowns, others have sadly taken their lives. Not a cult you would want to be a part of. Honestly, no cult you want to be a part of. Coming in at number 7, we have the Raelism. Founded in 1974, this cult believes that life was created by aliens. Yes, you heard me correctly, aliens. These aliens then assumed human form to go check in on Earth and see how things are going. These aliens are said to be people like Jesus or the Buddha. So this cult spends their days worshipping space aliens. The scariest part? In 2000, they claimed that they founded a cloning company and that they managed to successfully clone a human. Literally everyone went nuts, and the White House even got involved in this, even though they never had any proof of the cloning. Unless the White House was like, okay, we'll pay you guys, just give us this device so we can clone people, but it stays between us. Dude, imagine? Okay, like that's freaky. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Doomsday Cult. Now, this one is pretty vague because there are a number of Doomsday cults out there, but they all pretty much follow the same belief. Now, there are 2 types of Doomsday cults. One that predicts disasters and thinks that the end is near, and the other one tries to destroy the Earth to bring the world to an end. Either way, both are terrifying, and you definitely don't want to get mixed up in it. Both cults have been known to brainwash their followers. So they don't believe what the media is telling them and only listen to the lies of their leaders. Either way, they believe that like, hey, we're gonna die soon, or hey, let's try and make everyone die soon. So it's terrifying. Moving on to number 4, we have the Order of the Solar Temple. This cult was born off of the beliefs of the Knights Templar, and is said to be one of the creepiest cults out there. It is believed to have been founded in the late 1970s to early 80s. For the most part, the cult was peaceful. They had some weird beliefs, but they didn't do any harm. That was until 1994, when they believed that a member's son was the Antichrist. As a result, they killed both individuals. Then they enjoyed a Last Supper before taking their own lives by poison. On that day, 53 cult members lost their lives. It's an absolutely terrifying and heartbreaking story. To this day, this cult still exists. Moving on to number 3, we have the Aum Shinrikyo cult. Founded in 1984 by a man named Shoko Ashara, this is a doomsday cult as well as a terrorist organization. Basically, members of the cult believe that the end of the world was near, but that they were going to be the only survivors. Why? Well, the leader said he had powers and could transfer his spiritual power to his followers to take away their sins. In 1995, this cult carried out the deadly Tokyo subway sarin attack, where 13 people died and thousands got injured. Apparently, this was done as an attempt to start the apocalypse, but also to stop the authorities from shutting down their cult. As a result of this attack, 13 members of the group got the death sentence, including the leader Shoko. After his death, the name of the cult was changed, but to this day, it's still active. The cult was never banned and it has about 1,500 followers. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Church of Scientology. Is the Church of Scientology a cult or religion? Well, a number of people think that it is indeed a cult. You've probably heard of it because of famous Hollywood star Tom Cruise. He's a very prominent figure in the church. And this cult is certainly one you never want to get involved in. For starters, once you're in, the church will force you to disconnect from people not involved in the cult. This includes your family and your friends. Jenna Miscavige Hill, a member of the church that left in 2005, had this to say about it, and I quote, "I was allowed to see my parents only once a week at best. Sometimes not for years." So when you do want to leave, you literally have no one to go back to since you cut them out of your life. That's the other thing, leaving is so difficult. Apparently they will intimidate and harass you into staying. According to another ex-member, they also brainwash their followers. And if anyone misbehaves, they send them to this prison camp, where they are basically worked to death and barely fed to teach them never to be disobedient. There's also rumors that this cult commits crimes and murders, but they're so powerful that they can just get away with it all. If that's not scary, then I don't know what is. Starting off this countdown, we have Heaven's Gate. Found in 1974 and led by Bonnie Nettles and Marshall Applewhite, the Heaven's Gate cult believed in UFOs and impending doom. They convinced their followers that the only way they could escape this was by taking their own lives. By doing this, they believed that they would reach the next level and help evolution on other planets. And according to them, Jesus was an extraterrestrial, and when he died, his body rose from the dead before being carried away by a spaceship. Interesting, I know. In 1997, 39 members took their lives and they were all found wearing arm patches that read Heaven's Gate Away Team. Moving on to number 9, we have the Church Universal and Triumphant. The Church Universal and Triumphant was founded in 1975. It was run by a woman named Elizabeth Clare Prophet. She made her followers believe that she was a channel for God. Apparently, God told her that the world was going to end. So she moved her church compound near Yellowstone National Park for safety reasons. She said that the end of the world would come in 1990 after a nuclear war between the US and Russia. When that didn't happen, a lot of members left the cult. Slowly over time, the cult just dissolved. In our 8th spot, we have William Miller. William Miller was an American Baptist preacher as well as the founder of Adventism. He was known for preaching about the end of the world, which he prophesied would be in 1844. He thought the end would come as a purifying apocalypse so the world would be cleansed of sinners. Miller and his followers, the Millerites, believed that there would be a fire in which saints would be resurrected and they would cleanse the world of this evil. When this didn't happen, he lost his loyal followers. In fact, the day in which the world didn't end is now referred to as the Great Disappointment. In our 7th spot, we have Jim Jones. Jim Jones is known as one of the most famous cult leaders in the world. He was the founder and leader of the People's Temple, which he ran in an isolated area in the Guyanese jungle. He convinced his followers that the government was coming for him and that they were going to start a thermonuclear war. In fact, he believed that on July 15th, 1967, a nuclear attack was going to happen. Alas, it didn't. Anyways, in 1978, he convinced his followers to take their lives. He described this to be a revolutionary act. So on November 18th, his cult leaders drank cyanide-laced punch. Some of them drank it willingly, while others had it forced upon them. In the end, 909 people lost their lives. It was said to be one of the most harrowing tragedies in American history. Coming in at number 6, we have the Branch Davidians. This cult was originally founded in 1929 by a man named Victor T. Houteff. and they were a spin-off of the Seventh-day Adventists. Then in 1955, Ben Roden organized the Branch Davidians. Later, the cult was controlled by David Koresh. He believed that the end was near. He believed in the several seals from the Bible's book of Revelation. He believed that when the seals were opened, that marked the second coming of Christ and the start of the apocalypse. So David and his cult were preparing for the apocalypse. He claimed that he could speak to God, and that's what God told him to do, to prepare. But things ended badly in 1993 when the FBI and military stormed the cult's base. They had belief that the group was stockpiling illegal weapons, so they conducted a raid. This led to a deadly shootout and ended with their building going up in flames. This resulted in the death of 76 cult members. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Russian Doomsday Cult. The Russian Doomsday Cult was founded by a man named Pyotr Kuznetsov. He believed that the end of the world was going to happen in 2008. So in 2007, he gathered the 30 members of his group and sent them to a shelter in a cave. He instructed them to wait there until the end of the world. Of course, Pyotr didn't accompany them. After 6 months in the cave, 14 members decided to come out. Sadly, 2 passed away in this cave. 9 members decided to stay a bit longer, but then later came out. In fact, the members were instructed to take their own lives if the authorities tried to intervene. Thankfully, when the police did come to the rescue, they didn't do that. As for Pyotr, well, he tried to take his own life when his doomsday prediction didn't come true. He then was sent to a psychiatric facility. In our 4th spot, we have The Family. Otherwise known as the Great White Brotherhood, this was an Australian New Age group led by a woman named Anne Hamilton. She convinced her followers that she was the reincarnation of Jesus. She also said that Buddha and Krishna were other spiritual beings that came down to help humanity. And of course, they all believed that the end was near. The cult lived away together in the countryside outside of Melbourne. The kids were instructed to never talk to outside people. They were all homeschooled. Those that didn't listen were punished through beatings, starvation, or emotional torture. People there were also frequently drugged with hallucinogenics. In the end, the police raided the cult and saved the 28 children that they had brought in. Anne and the other woman helping her were then criminally charged. And a number of cult members actually sued her for psychiatric and psychological illness upon other things. It said that she paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to her victims. Moving on to number 3, we have Box Canyon Cult. Located in Southern California, Box Canyon was the perfect rocky hideaway for a doomsday cult. It all started when a man who went by the name of Krishna Venta claimed that he was the second coming of Christ and was over 240,000 years old. In 1948, he bought 25 acres of land in Box Canyon to build a monastery and several rooms for his followers to stay in. In the monastery, Venta would preach about the impending World War III, which would spark the end of the world. He said that World War III was their chance to take back the world. But they were never able to see their plan through. In 1958, 2 men whose wives joined the cult decided to bomb it. The blast killed them, Venta, and 7 of the followers. Some of the survivors stayed there, whereas others went to join Jim Jones's cult and later passed away there. In our 2nd spot, we have the Order of the Solar Temple. This cult was formed in 1984 by Joseph DiMambro and Luke Joret. It started off its teachings based on New Age spiritualism, but they realized that they got more followers when they started to become more doomsday focused. And then these followers brought them more money, so they loved that. So they believed that once the end of the world came, they would be transported to another planet and then live there. Now, the history of what went down in this cult is very complex, so I'm just gonna do a quick rundown. In the 1990s, authorities started to investigate this group. In 1994, a man and his family were killed after speaking out about the cult. Days later, 2 temple buildings in Switzerland burned to the ground. 48 bodies were found inside. Some were shot, others were injected with tranquilizers and left to perish in the fire. Then in 1995, a building in the Swiss Alps burnt down. 16 bodies were found inside there. Then in 1997, a building in Quebec burnt down. 5 more members died then. In total, 74 cult members passed away. To this day though, this cult still exists. And And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Shinriko cult. The Shinriko cult was founded in 1984 by a man named Shoko Ashihara. Members of this cult believed that the end of the world was near. The leader predicted that it would occur in 1996 or between 1999 and 2003. But he claimed that the members were going to be the only ones that survived. But in order to become a member, they would have to sign their estates over to the group, which in the end made him incredibly wealthy. In 1995, the cult carried out the deadly Tokyo subway sarin attack, where 13 people died and thousands got injured. Apparently, this was done as an attempt to start the apocalypse, but also to show how strong they were to try and stop the authorities from shutting down their cult. As a result of this attack, 13 members of the group got the death sentence, including the leader. After his death, the name of the cult changed, and to this day, it's still active. It's said that it has about 1,500 active followers.
Number 10. The Freedomites. After the Tsarist persecution in Russia, a group of pacifist anti-materialist Christians, referred to as spirit warriors, fled the country and came to Canada in the 20th century. While many were happy to just live freely off the land, a section of the group grew unhappy at the Canadians for asking them to attend school and enlist in the military. This group called themselves the Sons of Freedom, or Freedomites, and despite their name, wanted to impose their way of belief on others. They were most famous for their dislike of materialism, and would often show this by protesting in the complete nude. Many photos of the group of farmers marching in the nude became pretty famous and put the religion on the map. They didn't simply protest in the nude though, they took to another more violent outlet, arson, burning down many buildings including homes, schools, courtrooms, and bridges. This led to the persecution of the entire group, including the peaceful ones who hadn't been involved, and they were pretty much wiped out of the country. Number 9. Angel's Landing. Daniel Perez led the Angel's Landing cult for 15 years. They traveled from state to state and had a large commune on Daniel's property near Wichita. Things overall didn't seem too bad for people looking in, but suspicions were raised when there were a number of so-called accidental deaths, and Daniel always seemed to be coming into large amounts of money. As it turns out, Daniel Perez actually had been responsible for the deaths that had taken place in the group, and he had been using it as a ploy to collect their life insurance money, collecting millions of dollars over the years. However, he wouldn't be able to get away with it forever when one young member of the group returned to the police to tell her that she had actually lied about one of the deaths being accidental. After he was found responsible and arrested, he was finally put on trial in 2015, being charged with a total of 28 different crimes. Number 8. The Ant Hill Kids. The Ant Hill Kids were in existence for 8 years, and at their peak had a following of only 12 adults and 26 children. Rock Therio created the group when he believed that the world was going to end in 1979, and as with most leaders, gained his followers through his charisma and looks. He moved them to a place in Quebec where they started building a town, working together like a group of ants and coining their name. Over time, the leader became violent due to his excessive drinking, and would perform drunken surgeries on the cult members in attempts to prove that he could heal them, but always doing much more harm than good. One of his many wives managed to escape the horrible conditions and went to the police about what had happened, Rock being arrested 6 weeks later. His arrest ended the group and he went away for life in prison, dying in 2011 at the hands of a fellow inmate. Number 7. Heaven's Gate. From 1974 to 1997, around 200 men and women unsatisfied with their lives came together and joined the Heaven's Gate cult. The group was formed by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles after they had met and bonded in a psychiatric institution. They believed that they were both aliens camouflaged in human bodies and had been sent to teach people about the afterlife in outer space that was referred to as the next level. He convinced his followers to move away from their families to get ready to be taken to the next level, but it didn't end up happening and most of their followers left. But we're living in the future, so the two took to the internet to gain new followers, the website still being available to view online to this day. This ended up culminating in 1997 with the group leaving their containers and graduating from their current lives, being found with buzzed haircuts, $5.75 in their pockets, and Nike decades. Number 6. Synanon. In 1958, Synanon was opened in Santa Monica, and it would be active there for over 30 years, having 13 1,300 members at its peak. This group mainly recruited addicts and took many different forms over its lifespan: a rehabilitation program, a utopian society, and a church. It was created by Charles Dedrich, and its staples were its focus on quitting cold turkey, tough love, and something called the game, where one member of the group opens up and the rest verbally attack them. Hundreds of people eventually moved in and paid to live there, Synanon at one point having around $33 million in assets. But Charles' greed and hunger for power only continued to grow, and the conditions in the place worsened over time, facing accusations of things like abduction and brainwashing. The lawsuit placed and won made Charles so angry that he got his followers to put a venomous snake in the man's mailbox, the man barely surviving. He was eventually arrested, and Synanon was shut down for the allegations and for tax fraud. Number 5. The People's Temple. This one is the one that most of us are probably all familiar with, especially if you chose to click on this video. Reverend Jim Jones created what he called the People's Temple of the Disciples of Christ, but you probably know it as Jonestown, the place that was supposed to be utopia. Many people liked him, and he had thousands of followers, and even the support of politicians. What they didn't know was that Jones had a penchant for substance abuse and was very violent towards his followers. Jonestown, the supposed utopia, quickly became a nightmare for the people living there, being held under strict rules and regimens. On November 18th, a California congressman came to visit, and people wanted to escape with him back to the United States. Jones became incredibly angry at this notion and ordered everyone into the pavilion, ordering them to drink a mixed drink that would kill them. Number 4. Demas Kanjang. Demas Kanjang was able to form a cult fairly easily. The leaders of these types of groups will usually try to convince you of something, whether it be that they are an alien or have magical healing powers. Demas did this by convincing people that he could pull money out of thin air, and the way that he did it is incredibly simple. You can see videos of him demonstrating this online. He simply puts his hands behind his back, and then brings them forward with money in them, obviously having just kept the money behind his back. But it was somehow still enough to convince people that he had magic powers, sometimes pulling not just money from the air, but also meatballs and plastic bags of soup. He somehow managed to amass thousands of followers and almost $38 million in donations, even coming from high-ranking members of the military and people in government. When two of his followers realized that he was eventually going to run out of money to pull from behind his back, they confronted him, and he responded by having them both killed. He was arrested and convicted in 2016 and still has another 12 years to serve. Number 3. Scientology. The so-called Church of Scientology was developed by L. Ron Hubbard and surrounds the idea that humans have trauma preventing them from experiencing life properly, and that they must work towards a spiritual state called clear. Their teaching surrounds a few different truths, some of them being listed as: man is an immortal spiritual being. His experience extends well beyond a single lifetime. His capabilities are unlimited, even if not presently realized. They also believe in an alien called Xenu who brought all his buddies to Earth 75 million years ago and blew them up next to a volcano, which, you know, makes sense. You've probably heard about Scientology because of just how many celebrities are connected to it. Its members include people like Tom Cruise, John Travolta, and Kirstie Alley. Scientology is incredibly controversial, mostly due to the reports of them brainwashing their members and the evidence that the cult had been created for the express purpose of making money. Number 2. The True Russian Orthodox Church. The True Russian Orthodox Church is one of many so-called doomsday cults, groups that center their beliefs and practices around the idea of the world ending, and usually very soon. Just south of Moscow in November of 2007, a trained engineer who had declared himself a prophet blessed his group members before sending them into a cave to wait for the world to end. And while they were in there, he was getting a psychiatric evaluation. The 35 group members stayed inside the cave and threatened to detonate gas canisters if anyone tried to remove them. They stayed in the cave for months, just sitting around and waiting for the world to end in the small area. Two of the group members eventually passed away within the cave, and as they could not leave lest they face the apocalypse, they simply stayed in the room with the bodies. However, in April it became too much, and the living group members were convinced to come out of the cave and return to society, finding that the world hadn't ended after all. The leader was taken to the hospital after being distraught over his prediction not coming true, and the cult was ended. Number 1. The FLDS. If you've been browsing through Netflix recently, then you've probably seen the limited series called Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey. The series documents the history of the group called the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, or FLDS for short. It chronicles the series of people who have managed to escape from the group, which broke off from Mormonism in the 1930s after polygamy was outlawed. It was led by Rulon Jeffs, but things apparently didn't get too bad until his son, Warren Jeffs, took over, dissipating the council and taking complete control over the group. Many terrible things happened throughout their history, and if you want the full details, feel free to watch the series. I really do recommend it. It included things like psychological blackmail, separating children from their families to be sent to do labor on a supposed utopia in Texas, and more. Things came to a head in a 2008 raid of the compound and Jeffs went to prison, but the group is still active today, with Jeffs still giving teachings from behind bars.
Coming in at number 10 is the People's Temple. In the 1950s, Indiana native Jim Jones founded a church that he claimed promoted socialism and equality with religious elements of Christianity. Initially, he was a little more than a charismatic hustler, but as the years progressed, he demanded more and more of followers. In the early 1970s, Jones moved his group to California and set them up in a commune-like settlement in Redwood Valley. Jones eventually came to believe that a nuclear war was imminent and moved his followers again to the South American country of Guyana, which he thought would be outside the potential danger zone. The group lived there for several years as the People Temple Agricultural Project, but after former members started speaking out against the church, San Francisco Congressman Leo Ryan decided to travel to Jonestown to investigate claims of mistreatment. Temple security guards opened fire on Leo's group, and back at the settlement, Jones ordered his followers to drink a cyanide-laced beverage. Now this is where the phrase "drinking the Kool-Aid" originates. A total of 918 people died in the incident, and until 2001 it was the largest loss of American civilian life in history. Number 9. Narco-Satanists. Adolfo Constanzo was a cult leader who led an infamous drug trafficking and occult gang in Mexico. His cult members nicknamed him the Godfather, and he led the cult with Sarah Alderete, whose followers named the Godmother. Now the cult was involved in multiple ritualistic deaths, including the death of Mark Kilroy, an American student who died in Matamoros in 1989. Mark was taken by his abductors to a ranch where he was tortured and sodomized for hours before dying in a human sacrifice ritual. His life was ended with a machete blow, and then he had his brain removed and boiled in a pot. The cult then inserted a wire through his spinal column, amputated his legs at the knees, and buried him at the ranch along with 14 other people who had their lives taken before him. Adolfo told his followers that human sacrifice granted them immunity from law enforcement for their drug smuggling operations. Now Adolfo, Sarah, and the rest of the cult went on the run when detectives discovered their shrine. Eventually, the police found their hideout in Mexico City on May 6, 1989, and after shootout, Adolfo and one of his accomplices were shot, and Sarah was convicted of criminal association in 1990 and jailed for 6 years. Number 8. Love Has Won. On April 28, 2021, the mummified remains of Amy Carlson, the leader of the group Love Has Won, were found in a home in Moffat, Colorado. Amy was known as her followers as Mother God and claimed to be able to cure cancer and communicate with angels. The group proclaimed that Amy was a divine 19 billion year old being who had birthed all creation. She claimed that she had been reincarnated 534 times, including as Jesus, Joan of Arc, Marilyn Monroe, and Cleopatra, and would lead 144,000 people into a mystical fifth dimension. According to affidavits taken by the county sheriff's office, the group was brainwashing people and stealing their money. A core group of 12 to 20 members lived with Amy, and this group did daily live streams on YouTube in order to recruit more members, solicit donations, and promote new age products and vitamin supplements. The group offered etheric surgery, which cost $88 per session, claiming that they could remove sickness and negative energy from the body. Number 7. Branch Davidians. The Branch Davidians broke off from the Davidian Seventh-day Adventists in 1955, but didn't make headlines until the infamous Waco siege in 1993. In 1981, David Koresh took over the group, which was headquartered at a commune called Mount Carmel.
After allegations of mistreatment within the commune, on February 28, 1993 at 4:20 a.m., the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms attempted to execute a search warrant relating to the charges. The ATF attempted to breach the compound for approximately 2 hours until their ammunition ran low. 4 ATF agents died and another 16 agents were wounded during the raid. The FBI then launched a siege that lasted for 51 days and ended with the compound being destroyed by fire. Now, David died along with 76 others, and a governmental investigation later concluded that the branch had started the fire themselves. Number 6. The movement for the restoration of the 10 Commandments of God. Wow, now that name is a mouthful. So this sect formed in the Kangyu district of Uganda in the 1980s and taught its members that they had to follow the 10 Commandments in order to survive the apocalypse, which the leaders believed was coming in the year 2000. When January 1st, 2000 passed without incident, shocking, I know, members began to question why their leaders had failed to get their apocalypse date right, and leaders then predicted that the real end would come on March 17th. Now, it did, but not because of anything supernatural. The leaders set fire to the movement church, ending the lives of as many 530 people inside. Authorities later discovered the bodies of more victims at the group's other properties in Uganda and concluded that the leaders had orchestrated the deaths in response to turmoil caused by their repeated failure to predict the apocalypse. Number 5. Good News International Church. Good News International Church was founded by Paul Mackenzie and his first wife in 2003. It's adamantly anti-Western, with amenities such as healthcare, education, and sports being dismissed as evils of Western life, and with Paul condemning the United States, the United Nations, and the Catholic Church as tools of Satan. The group also devotes much of its teachings to the end of times. Now, Paul accumulated a sizable following largely due to convincing his followers that he could speak directly with God. Now, the group attracted international attention in April 2023 when it was revealed that Paul had allegedly instructed members to starve themselves en masse to meet Jesus, which had resulted in the deaths of over 400 people. Not to mention, more than 600 people are still reported missing, a regional official said. Now, Paul did not join his followers in the mass starvation though. In fact, a dietary menu was found on the wall in one of the special houses in the forest believed to be his resting room. Now, he is currently under police custody as the process of exhuming bodies continues, and police authorities claim that some bodies were missing organs and believe that they are being harvested and sold. Number 4. Heaven's Gate. Founded by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles in the 1970s, Heaven's Gate was a cult that had a complicated belief system involving aliens, spaceships, and an intimate recycling of the planet Earth. Now, after Bonnie died in 1985, Marshall took the group to even further extremes, and in 1997 Marshall taped himself in Dew's Final Exit, speaking of a mass self-elimination and the only way to evacuate this Earth. After asserting that Comet Hales-Bopp was the sign the group had been looking for, as well as speculation that an unidentified flying object, UFO, may have been trailing the comet, Marshall and his 38 followers prepared for taking their own lives in a ritual so their souls could reach the next level before the closure of Heaven's Gate. Members believed that after their deaths, a UFO would take their souls to another level of existence above human, which Marshall described as being both physical and spiritual. Their preparations included each member videotaping a farewell message. Now, to end their own lives, members took phenobarbital mix with applesauce or pudding and washed it down with vodka. Now, after ingesting the applesauce/pudding mix, they secured plastic bags around their heads to induce asphyxiation. They all wore the same uniform and Nike shoes and had $5.75 in their pockets. Number 3. Synonym. Synonym, originally known as Tender Loving Care, is a new religious movement founded in 1958 by Charles E. Chuck Destrich Sr. in Santa Monica, California. Originally established as a drug rehabilitation program, Synonym developed an alternative community center on group truth-telling sessions that came to be known as the Synonym Game, a form of attack therapy. Now, the group ultimately became a cult called the Church of Synonym in the 1970s. People of all professions worked to give their money to the group, often doing tremendous amounts of physical labor. Synonym at one point had $33 million in assets. As Charles's hunger for power grew and the rules of Synonym became stricter and the mistreatment became more rampant. Charles compiled an enemies list, which ultimately became a hit list. One included lawyer Paul Montez, who wanted to help free families kept in Synonym and had won a $300,000 judgment against Synonym for abducting and brainwashing a member. Now this enraged Charles to the point that he ordered 2 of his Imperial Marines to place a venomous rattlesnake in Paul's mailbox the following months. Now Paul was bitten but barely survived. Police raided Synonym and a drunk Charles was arrested in his home on December 2nd, 1978. He was sentenced to 5 years supervised probation, fined $5,000, and ordered to no longer run Synonym. The group was shut down forever due to violence and tax fraud in 1991, and Charles died on February 28, 1997. Number 2. The Kirtland Cult. Mormon extremist Jeffrey Lundgren claimed he was a prophet and could talk to God. He took an unpaid position as a temple guide at the Kirtland Temple but was fired for embezzling tens of thousands of dollars. After losing his job, he started his own church with members who felt the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was becoming too inclusive to women in the LGBT community. Jeffrey rented a farmhouse for his followers to live in, and he would soon meet the Avery family, who had moved from Missouri to join his group. Although they gave Jeffrey thousands of dollars, he still found it sinful that they didn't live on the commune and had saved money from selling their previous home. Jeffrey had several criticisms about the family as well. He disliked the husband Dennis, thought the wife Cheryl was too independent, and felt their children were misbehaved. Jeffrey then had become more violent and paranoid in his beliefs, and he encouraged male followers to start firearms training to prepare for the end of days. He also devised a plan to take over the Kirtland Temple. However, members shared these plans with police and it never happened. Now Jeffrey later preached that he would bring Zion to Kirtland if members got rid of their belongings and moved into the wilderness. The Avery family was on board and prepared to do so, but Jeffrey told others the family must die to reach Zion. On April 17, 1989, the entire Avery family was invited to the farmhouse and had their lives ended by Jeffrey and several members of the Kirtland cult. The family's bodies were found beneath piles of garbage, soil, and their personal items in January 1990. They had been bound and gagged, thrown into a pit, and shot. Jeffrey was convicted of homicide and died by lethal injection on October 24, 2006. And coming in at number 1 is Scientology. Scientology is a set of beliefs and practices invented by the American author L. Ron Hubbard and an associated movement. Estimates put the number of Scientologists at under 40,000 worldwide. As you may know, many celebrities are a part of this group, like Tom Cruise, John Travolta, and Elizabeth Moss. Scientology beliefs include reincarnation and that traumatic events cause problematic engrams in the mind. They claim that an activity called auditing can remove the engrams, and a fee is charged for each session of auditing. Once an auditor deems an individual free of engrams, typically after several years, they are given the status of clear, aka it's just a cash grab. There have been controversies involving the Church of Scientology, and they include criminal behavior by members of the organization, including the infiltration of US government, organized harassment of people perceived as enemies of the Church of Scientology, Scientology's disconnection policy, in which some members who are antagonistic to the organization, and attempts to legally force search engines to censor information critical of the Scientology organization. Now this cult is clearly still active today, which is scary.